Okay, welcome everyone to today's IGAC ECR workshop. Today we have Ilze Millere from the National Centre for Atmospheric Science in the UK, here to talk about climate communications, how the right words and pictures change the way we feel. Ilze, please take it away.
Yeah, nice to meet you all, and thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I think I'm just going to get started. Can you see that all right? Okay. Yeah, so I put together a presentation. Hopefully, I haven't tested the slides, so I might have to skip through something if you're like running low on time. Feel free to let me know if I need to hurry up on something. Yeah, so basically, over the last few years, I've been working at the National Centre for Atmospheric Science, where we research climate change, air pollution, weather, and I work in communications. So it's my job to turn all of that science into audiovisual and written content that can be engaged with and understood by various audiences. And it has been my personal passion to research environmental humanities and climate communications, climate psychology, and just to try to understand why these topics can be difficult or controversial to comprehend and what we can do to improve the way we speak about these topics. So this is just like a collection of lots of different quotes and ideas that I've put together, and quite a few authors will be repeated over here. So if you're interested to read more, I would suggest the books that I will be, the authors I'll be referring to and their books. So yeah, so we're going to start by looking a little bit at the human psychology, and that's specifically at three different aspects of it that I have looked into. So first of all, we have biases. So yeah, so this is all very brief, very short. I'm sure you're already aware that we have confirmation bias and availability bias, and these two are quite relevant when it comes to climate. Because yeah, so with confirmation bias, we tend to cherry pick the evidence that already supports the knowledge we have or the attitudes or beliefs we have. And with the availability bias, it's the tendency to basically fill in the gaps and make up our own mind, just looking at the evidence which is most easily accessible, which can become a really big problem in the age of social media, where all the algorithms are basically creating these echo chambers for us, where the more we engage with something, the more we receive the same type of content. So it can really fuel that both confirmation bias and availability bias. And if we have a certain idea, certain belief, then it's very easy to go online and just find a whole bunch of people who feel the same way, which only makes us feel like, the way we feel must be the right way, and there isn't another way. And yeah, so these are some quotes that are linked to climate on the matter. So George Marshall says, in our dispersed and media-driven society, people are able to immerse themselves in a self-constructed social network where the norm is entirely consistent with their own views. So, as I said, the echo chambers. People obtain their information through the people they trust, or beyond that, from the parts of the wider media that speak to their worldview and values. So again, this is looking at when it comes to us expanding our worldviews as people, we go to the people we already have some sort of relationship with, some kind of trust, or we go to media that we trust. So we basically tend to enclose ourselves in these chambers where we are only feeding our brains with information we already agree with. And George Marshall says also, everyone, experts and non-experts alike, converts climate change into stories that embody their own values, assumptions, and prejudices. So this basically summarizes how we can take a massive concept as climate change, and our brains just kind of filter out information that we don't like, that we don't agree with, or highlights information we really want to hold on to. And so we create these stories in our heads that are based on our own pre-existing values and assumptions. Point number 2 on psychology. I would like to just very briefly talk about the two sides of our brain that we all have. So first of all, we have the analytical side, which deals with symbols, words, and numbers. And we have the emotional side, which is focused on creativity, intuition, and experience. And the reason why that matters is because as people, we are all storytellers. Storytelling is how we understand the world. It's how we embed beliefs, how we communicate. We like to categorize things in categories. We like to have beginnings and endings to put everything in easy narratives. And this is very much linked to climate change because climate change is not a story that is easy to put together. It's very complex and there's lots of different threads to it. So stories are the means by which we humans make sense of our world, learn our values, form our beliefs, and give shape to our thoughts, dreams, hopes, and fears. And this matters because stories are the means by which the emotional brain makes sense of the information collected by the rational brain. People may hold information in the form of data and figures, but their beliefs about it are held entirely in the world in the form of stories. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we think about climate change, we, especially in the world of science specifically, we often think of numbers and graphs and data and models and all these things that are incredible forms of compacting data, but basically presenting information like this isn't really sparking any emotional associations. They're not really speaking to the emotional part of our brain. So yeah, as this quote says as well, the theories, graphs, projects, and data speak almost entirely to the rational brain. That helps us to evaluate the evidence and for most people to recognize that there is a major problem, but it does not spur us to action. And this is important because to mobilize people, this has to become an emotional issue. It has to have the immediacy and salience. A distant, abstract, and disputed threat just doesn't have the necessary characteristics for seriously mobilizing public opinion. So, yeah, so basically, climate change can often feel very distant, very abstract, like something that is only, especially, so from here, I have to emphasize, I'm speaking from a Westerner point of view as somebody living in the UK. So in the like the global north kind of part of the world or in the west part of the world, we often tend to think of climate change as something that is affecting people elsewhere, or that is as something that's going to affect people in the far distant future. So it's not exactly something that we have to concern ourselves with right now. And all of that makes it a very difficult issue to engage with emotionally. So I'm not really sure how to do this part because normally these workshops are quite interactive and I have a few photos to look at. And I can just like briefly talk about them, but if you wanted to say something, we can also like have a part here where you share some thoughts. It's basically going to just have a look at some photos and what we think about them. So to start with, this is just a quick like dive into how climate change is represented. So I put climate change on two search engines on Google and Ecosia. And something that like immediately jumps out to me is how much there is like abstract visuals, like right away. There's quite a few animations or graphics or a lot of these like split images with one type of world on one side and another part of the world on the other side. There's also quite a few polar bears appearing, which is quite a heated topic in the climate communications because polar bears were chosen quite a few years ago as a symbol to spark empathy when talking about climate change. And for a while, I think it definitely was working. But I think over the years, that has become quite an ineffective visual. Again, this is obviously going to work differently for other people. Other people might still be very much affected by these. But overall, if we think about what I was just saying about how climate change feels very distant and abstract and impersonal, seeing a picture of a polar bear might not be the most effective thing because most of us are probably never going to meet one. and we're never going to be somewhere where there's icebergs or polar bears roaming around. So it is not exactly the most effective tool. Now, this is when I changed my search a little bit. I'm just going to check. Oh, sorry. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm liking the comment. I'm going to keep this on the side, the comments, so I can see them. So when I changed it to climate crisis, just to change that word, immediately made the photos appear, well, at least to me personally, a lot more personal and impactful. There's a lot more people appearing in photos. So we can see people, we can see photos of protests, we can see this kind of image. I don't know if you can see where my mouse is going, but the photo of the child holding a sign, or there's another photo of a child on this dry ground. And then on the other side, with the Ecosia photos, there's a lot more emphasis on climate disasters. So people um, wading through water from flooding or some other natural disaster that may have happened. So I think that's already a really interesting kind of brief study into how changing one word can really change the associations with it, at least according to the internet and what photos come up. And I do think that that also is a more effective word instead of saying climate change, saying climate crisis. Um, so yeah, so these are just like 5 photos that I had selected that I normally would have like people discussing out loud and what they think. So I'm just going to maybe briefly summarize it on how we have the world on fire and the other part of the world looking nice and fresh and clean. Again, I think it's obviously a striking image, but I wouldn't say that it incites too much emotion to me. Even worse, the animation with the sweaty, creepy, animated Earth, not really saying much. The polar bear I already discussed feels probably quite distant and impersonal and not really relating to our everyday lives. And it's not really showing how climate change impacts us as people. While the 2 images of people, in my opinion, are the most effective, I think using children is a really tricky, I guess, subject from ethical perspectives where people might be quite split. But obviously, you can't deny that it does add to that like vulnerability and, innocence and fear, I guess. And then the people walking through, carrying things through what appears to be a flooded area, I think is probably the most effective way of representing climate change. And then just for a very different perspective, these are some other photos I have found. So we have this WWF, World Wildlife Fund campaign, which happened a few years ago, where I feel like people are always quite split, but overall, I think there is a agreement that it is not the best way of trying to communicate climate change. I think that they had a really good idea behind it because the tagline is very catchy. But when I've spoken to a room full of scientists about this, they have all seemed quite amused by it and not very convinced because it just feels quite creepy and unrealistic and strange. And yeah, very like sci-fi and dystopian to basically imply that all of us will turn into fish people because apparently the whole world will be covered in water. Again, and this does kind of reflect on how climate change is such a complex issue because so many things are happening. Because, it's partially about flooding and sea level rise, and then the other part of it is droughts and fires, and then there's all the other things that are completely other topics as well, like food insecurity and economical insecurity and displacement, and there's just so many different areas to look at. So it's really challenging to find one, and clearly they wanted to focus on the whole flooding aspect of it, but that's just one part of it. Yeah. Then the middle one with the soccer or the football pitches, I thought was quite an interesting attempt at talking about so like the importance of good soil, because it is using terms, at least here in the UK, that people might be quite aware of how big, even though we have discussed that this is a really confusing use of language because it says soccer, which is not really the word that we use. But yeah, so most people can imagine roughly how big a football pitch is, even though they do differ in sizes. So it is an interesting case of trying to use everyday things that people enjoy and trying to like compare them with the climate messaging or with the environmental messaging. And similarly, at the bottom there, there is a campaign that happened in London where a group of activists took lots of famous film posters and basically turned them into environmental messaging and put them up on billboards. Personally, for me as a filmmaker and as a film fan, I really enjoy these. I think they're quite fun and they do catch my eye. But when I've had room discussions about these, we have said how they're not really going to work for everybody because, first of all, there's just so many billboards and posters all the time, and films are being promoted, and everything else is being promoted among them. And they might not really, they might just kind of drown in the noise, which is a whole other problem as well. So yeah, it would be if you have any thoughts on whichever one of these photos that I am showing throughout this you find particularly effective or completely the opposite, feel free to share them in the chat and I can take a look at them. And then finally, so this is where normally I basically speak about how photos as a whole, not just climate visuals, but just images as in general, generate very different emotions in us as people. And so I have 5 photos here of various things that are somewhat like loosely linked to environmental climate topics. And normally I ask the room to basically discuss and share what kind of feelings they evoke in them. And it's really interesting to see that there's always quite different ideas that happen. And I have really noticed after doing this with many groups over the years that it really does link back to where people have grown up and what kinds of environments they've been exposed to, and yeah, what kind of things they have experienced in their lives. So, for example, when we look at the skyscrapers, to me personally, as somebody from a small country who enjoys nature and doesn't really like big cities, that picture just kind of fills me with anxiety, to be honest, because I don't really enjoy big skyscrapers, and I just feel like they immediately to me represent crowded spaces and noise. Where somebody else, those are the representations of modernity and human achievement and work and ambition and like in a way that they might seem like really cool, clean buildings as well. Similarly to the massive road situation in the middle photo, there has always been a split with people when we have discussed this, where half of them will say, yes, there is a big road, but at least, there's plenty of greenery around, where the other half of the group might say, there's not, there used to be much greenery and now there isn't because now there's road going through it. So kind of seeing it the other way around. And yeah, so again, like to somebody that might look like maybe like a symbiotic kind of harmonious living between nature and humans, where every element has its place, where to somebody else that might just seem like, kind of cutting nature down to make space for humans. To somebody else that might just look like it's a representation of mobility and speed and commuting, and again, things that they might really appreciate and be proud of in life. And then we have the photo of the like smoke chimneys. And I have had really interesting conversations about this one because obviously normally in rooms where I present these, we are more or less people of similar values. And so the idea that most people understand that this photo is supposed to represent is air pollution. Um, but to lots of other people, that could simply be a representation of, of employment or like their local landscape, and it could seem quite normal and not that bothersome at all. And I actually had a really interesting case where when I presented this among lots of scientists here at the National Center for Atmospheric Science, somebody who is a air pollution scientist said that, she understands what she's supposed to feel looking at this, but actually all she feels looking at this photo is nostalgia, because she grew up in an area where she could see sites like these all the time. So actually, even though she understands the like negative implications behind the image, she is just feeling nostalgic and warm inside, which again just shows the complexity behind the messaging that we could receive from images, where there's lots of different narratives in our heads. With the iceberg, we already kind of discussed how it's a very common image to be used when talking about climate change, which I don't think is particularly effective because most of us will not see icebergs in our lives, and it feels so far away and remote. It's not really showing how, as people working in climate science, we will know that a melting iceberg or, rising sea levels do affect us around all of the world. But to people outside of this kind of environment, they just feel like a landscape far away, somewhere distant that they don't need to worry about. Or, they might even just see the beauty in it and not see anything negative about it at all. And finally, we have the woodlands that I just added there, also out of curiosity to see how people feel about it. And again, it's been really interesting when I've had, like, for example, fellow people from Eastern Europe in the audience, and we have said how a photo like that just looks like home and looks so nice. And then there will be other people in the room who maybe have grown up in a big city, and they say that it evokes fear because it just looks spooky and dark. And again, it just shows how, you might be in a room with like-minded people, but each photo will spark different emotions and feelings depending on our backgrounds and values and triggers that we have. Yeah, so that's why basically this point I'm making here, the final kind of psychology point, is about values and triggers. So we have this quote: people with different values have their own code books and they contain entirely different, even contradictory meanings. So it's basically the whole point of that previous slide, is to show how just one single image shown to two people who maybe have plenty of things in common actually might spark very different emotions in them. I'm gonna have a look. We have some comments, which is nice. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with the football. Yeah, so I do think that's the idea, that most people can visualize it. So using an area, a space that people can visualize, is a really impactful way to compare, for them to think about something else. I can't remember exactly, but I remember there was an example where we spoke about something to do with atmosphere, and one of the scientists basically said it would be like 17 Eiffel Towers tall. And I think it's always really good to try to think of something that people can visualize and then use that as like a basis to compare a concept or a term they might not be familiar with. And yeah, then I'm just looking at the other comment over there about cutting trees and creating space for growing population. Yeah, I mean, okay, this is a very big topic to look at. So I don't think we'll have the time to really look into it in too much detail. Um, but yeah, I think it's definitely a really big concept. And I do personally believe that there is a room for us to focus in on building a harmonious world where we do have to exist together with nature, instead of, just kind of treating nature as one thing to protect because at the end of the day, there's plenty of people in this world, and we have to live in this world. And it's more important, I think, to find ways of coexisting instead of just separating the two, if that makes sense for that short answer. I really like this quote as well from another book. People process information through their own worldviews, beliefs, and values, which is why conservatives and liberals can look at the exact same data and go away believing different things about it. So basically, this quote is representing like a more extreme way, an extreme version of looking at a picture of a forest and half of the group, half of the people thinking that it's pretty and lovely and peaceful, and the other part of the group thinking that it's scary and spooky and dark. So yeah, when we actually had a very specific example quite recently where we released a news article about air pollution, which was about sulfur emissions from ships. And the study was showing how the emissions have reduced over the last few years because of law change in shipping industries. And so that's how we presented the article. And then some major news agencies in the UK also wrote about the same study, and they really focused on the fact of how polluting ships are. And I just found it really fascinating how the whole point of the study was that the emissions are reducing. They are still there, but they are going down, and how good it is to highlight that policies and law change is working. But they chose to really focus in on the fact that they took the same exact data, the same numbers, like everything was accurate in what they said. It was just the way they presented it was like, look at this pollution that's happening over here. And so it's really important to consider the values and the triggers that our audience might have when we speak to people who either maybe we don't know very well, or who we are aware that have very different worldviews and values. Because as George Marshall says over here, when people feel threatened and isolated, they can adopt a range of strategies to diminish their sense of eternal fear: denial, uncertainty, playing down the threat, fatalism, and anger towards the communicator. So that's kind of where you end up people, as we call them, climate deniers, or, people who just get really skeptical or really mad or full of conspiracy theories, because at the end of the day, what's really happening is that they are feeling attacked. They feel like, if we are saying that you need to stop taking flights, and you need to stop driving your car, and you need to stop eating meat and do all these things, then, and if those things are a big part of this person's culture and life and lifestyle, then, it's not nice to feel attacked all the time. And so that's how these defensive mechanisms then get put up, and it turns into this denialism and anger. Because yeah, at the end of the day, what is one of the big issues with climate communication is that quite often the villain is us, the people. In lots of the stories we see this concept of, your own personal carbon footprint, or, the things that you should be doing. And obviously, it is important that we all play a part. But if that is the main takeaway that is being drilled over and over again, then people will eventually feel like, everything is their fault, and everything that they are and do is wrong. And nobody likes to hear that. And just to kind of sum it up, rational scientific data can lose against a compelling emotional story that speaks to people's core values. So again, this is going back to this idea of emotional brain, rational brain, and showing that it's just really important to find ways to trigger our audience's emotional side of their brain, but also to respect their worldview and value and try to approach it so they don't feel attacked or, like disrespected for who they are as people. So I have a very, very brief case study over here on how we can make the climate story emotional. So by getting personal, I have used this short this example of this weather campaign that has been a global campaign happening for a few years now. I do have to make a disclaimer over here. This is not necessarily a climate campaign, it's a weather science campaign. However, like this is like the most thorough communications campaign I've had a chance to do while working at the National Center for Atmospheric Science. And I am currently working a similar project for like a climate science campaign. And we're doing all the same things. So I just thought I would use this one because we have more materials for it. So I've just like taken some screenshots of what Team X is, and you can see that the actual title for it is Multi-Scale Transport and Exchange Processes in the Atmosphere over Mountains Program and Experiment. Very long title. And again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with any of these descriptions. It's just to kind of show that it's quite a lot of long, complicated words and terms. So to take a campaign like this and to communicate it, these are some of the things that we did. I don't know if this is going to play. Oh, it's playing. Yeah, so these are just very, very briefly a few examples. We've done lots and lots of communications about it. So when you've done news stories online, we really focus on highlighting people's voices. So we have quotes. That's the easiest way of doing it. We always try to include as many quotes, as many colleagues as possible to really show the personal aspect. And we might also ask them more personal things of what certain campaigns mean to them from a more personal level. The video that's playing on the side over there is one of the first videos we got from the campaign, where I asked a group of students who were involved to basically answer a bunch of questions I sent to them and just to film themselves doing the things that they were doing. And it came to this like lovely vlog style video of them just being very chatty and casual and, you know, being very informative and really explaining everything behind a campaign and showing what it looks like to work in a campaign like this, but also making it feel very like approachable and relatable and kind of easy to follow because they're just using their own words and we can see them having fun, and it makes it all feel like, you know, there's actual humans behind science. It's not all, you know, the data comes from people like all of us. And yeah, there's been multiple videos that we've done like this one. And then there's like a few photo examples as well. So we've had people taking selfies and getting photos of themselves. And then there's two photos here that I took as well. So that was like the final stage of our campaign was to actually send a communications person there on the field. So I got to go for 5 days to film everybody and do interviews and take photos. And again, to like really highlight the personal aspect behind it all as well, of asking what people's like highlights have been and what they are taking away from this campaign personally, all while also speaking about the importance of the science behind it. So now we're going to take a look at some words as well. This is kind of related because we've just had a crazy heat wave, but these are some news articles from last year when there was a heat wave in summer. And so this is the words that multiple major UK news platforms used. And again, I feel like, again, if you have any like notes, anything interesting you're noticing, feel free to add it to the chat. I'm gonna try to keep an eye on that. And the first one already is kind of highlighting the thing that I just mentioned about how we don't want to be shaming people all the time. And the way it says Met Office blames man-made climate change, it just feels like quite a bit of an attack. And I remember actually reading the article and Met Office has been like misquoted, and it's just all a bit misleading over there just to really get the clicks going, I guess. Then there's other words like lethal heat or which one was the other one? Killer heat wave, like some really kind of doom and gloom dark phrases, which again, you're very welcome to add your thoughts. And something I want to emphasize here is there's no right or wrong answer, really. Like what I'm trying to highlight is just the complexity of the issue and, you know, just somebody words like that will be really triggering and they will, be sparked to action. While to somebody else, it might feel so just overwhelming and anxiety inducing that they will just go straight to hopelessness and maybe denial, because they'll feel like, if it's all that bad, then there's nothing we can do anyway. So, what's the point to even care? Interesting how this one in the middle is really focusing on the like effect on people, breaking into fights, while other news articles are focusing more on temperatures and things like that. So yeah, if you maybe have one that you think is the most like effective one in whatever way, feel free to share. Yeah. Then over here, yeah, we have a few more. I think, okay, so this is from last year when 2024 was confirmed as the warmest year on record. And again, I just thought it was an interesting way of looking at how different news titles refer to it. And this is just a personal like thought I've had over the last few months, where I've wondered about the use of record, like warmest year on record, and other things, because we have so many record breaking things that happen to do with climate. And I was wondering, again, there's no like fact behind this. This is just me having a thought about how when we think about records, they're normally things that we want to break. And as competitive species, I feel like people often get quite excited when a new record gets broken. And so I'm just wondering if this is actually the best way of speaking about it, because maybe there is some kind of unconscious part in human brain for some people where it triggers some sort of sense of excitement to see another news article of more records being broken, and maybe there's something exciting about it. So again, feel free to share. Oh, we have a comment. I'm going to have a look at that. To me, it's decided to find a wording off-putting. Yeah, so this is again very interesting, and I'm very aware that when I do these presentations, I am definitely speaking about the how I would like you to consider the way you talk about climate in like personal conversations. When it comes to actually presenting science, I'm very aware it has to be very neutral, very objective. But I do think that that can maybe then make scientists or people working in science feel a bit less easy to engage with, because it kind of strips away all that personality. So it's definitely, again, just something I am personally kind of considering and thinking about a lot lately, of how I feel like to communicate with people directly, effectively, you do kind of have to step out of that sense of objective neutrality. And you obviously have all the facts to back your arguments, but you do need to let a bit more of the personality and personal passion to come through, which we'll talk about a bit later. Yes, the super El Nino, we have heard a lot about that, and it does sound very, again, quite apocalyptical, I feel like, quite a crazy use of words. We haven't actually covered it because of that reason, because it felt a bit clickbaity in a way, and none of our scientists really wanted to make a comment on it. So instead, we just kind of reshared more information on what El Nino is, to just kind of keep people informed. Speaking of the records, I saw this headline, which doesn't use the word breaking a new climate record. And again, like I personally, as a person who enjoys words, I really like the creativity of this. Earth breaches 1.5 degrees Celsius climate limit for the first time. And then it says the threshold has been exceeded. Humanity is nearing the end of what many thought was a safe zone. I feel like it is, it is communicating all the same information, but to me personally, this feels a bit less alarmist, and it feels very, it feels serious and on the point and effective, but also, I don't know, I think to me personally, this feels a bit more engaging in a way, because it's not just kind of going all to the doom and gloom right away. So just to summarize everything I've been saying, hopefully not too chaotically, climate change doesn't activate our emotional brain because it feels distant and impersonal. Climate change lacks a classic story structure and elements. So it doesn't have the classical beginning, middle, and end because, we don't know how it's going to end. There's so many possibilities. There's no clear villains, or the villains are us as people, which isn't very effective either. Or, there's just too many moving elements to really put it in a nice, neat box, which people do like. Climate change communications tend to cater to certain audience with certain values. So that's kind of what I mean with even just the use of the polar bear. I feel like a picture of a polar bear is going to be more effective to people who already care about the world, about the natural world, because we don't want polar bears to die. When somebody else who is maybe a bit more distant from the world of climate and environment and natural themes, they're just not going to be that interested because it feels too distant from them. And even, the conversations about personal footprint and all of that, we can definitely understand it, and we understand how important this that everybody plays a part, where somebody else who isn't that informed on themes around climate might just feel like that's stripping them of their freedom and of their agency and taking away things that they enjoy or things that made their life easier or better. So it's important to have a think of how we cater to those people who have different worldviews than us and different lifestyles and different backgrounds. And finally, climate change communications lean towards doomism and urgency and guilt. All of these can only spark even more apathy and denial, or even anger, and basically all these emotions that only block our inspiration and motivation instead of sparking us into action. So I've put together my top 3 tips to try to summarize everything I've been reading about. And so these are my 3 points that I feel like these 3 stages that we can go through to try to improve the way we speak about climate. So number 1 is what I call the you, or the personal stage, about gaining trust and credibility. So really important to reflect on your experiences, feelings, and memories. Highlight your passion and your personal voice. Show the human behind the science, and make it clear why you care as a person. I think it's so important that there are so many different people working in climate science or environmental earth sciences. And there's a reason why we're here. And I personally think, and I'm not the only one who thinks, that there's literature backing this as well, that some of the most interesting stories are hidden right there, are hidden where, how did we get here? Why are we working in this field? What led us here? What makes us excited or passionate or inspired or motivated to do this job, to do this work? Because if there are all these other things that make us passionate and interested, and if we share them, then easily that could be something that other people care about as well. A story I share a lot about myself is about how I grew up in Latvia, and we had very distinct seasons. And I'm born in winter, so I always remember having my birthday with lots and lots of snow, months of knee-high snow and lovely white winter wonderland aesthetic, so to say, and always snow on Christmas, and all these wonderful snowy memories, ice skating on rivers and frozen lakes, and all of that, building snow houses and everything. And now I've been living in the UK for the last 14 years. However, every single time in the last 10 years when I've visited Latvia in winter, I've seen no snow at all, or I've seen the most pathetic little sprinkling. And I think it's just so striking to me how in my lifetime, which hasn't been that long yet, I have already seen such a huge difference, such a huge change in how the climate has changed and how much less snow there is. And if I have children, I would like them to have a similar childhood to mine, but that's just probably not going to happen because there just isn't as much snow anymore. And that's one of those things that I reflect on when I need to find that inspiration again and something I can share with people. Because if you start asking people about their childhood, the way they grew up, it's very, very highly likely that they're also going to have similar memories where, they had certain weather patterns or certain climate patterns that they don't experience anymore. And that's a really good starting point, I think, where we can start conversations, which is kind of linking to my second point about finding common ground. So this is your audience stage, or the person who you're speaking to, the person other side of the conversation. So remember triggers and values that they might be opposite to yours. You might say something, and the person might have a completely different association on the same subject. Ask questions and be open-minded. I think it's so important when I feel like I personally really struggle with confrontation. So if I sense that somebody has different views to me, I kind of want to like close in, and it's really hard for me to deal with that. And I have to really remind myself that, we do need to ask questions. Why does this person have these views? Where did they come from? Like where did they learn this? Or how did, how did they end up forming this worldview? And if you ask questions and you keep digging down, you might end up realizing that actually, like at the bottom of all of it, you both care about the same thing. It's quite likely that, you both care about having a healthy planet and having a safe future for you and your family and everybody around you and all the people you care about. But it's just somewhere in the journey of your life, you have just picked up these other clues and threads that have made your values just very different. And even though the end goal you are thinking about is the same. So it's just very important to find that compassion and patience and just to ask questions and try to find where these worldviews are coming from. Highlight your common humanity and find what they care about and related to climate change. Ask them about if they like coffee and then talk about how, in a few years' time, we might not actually be able to get coffee that easily because in the countries where coffee is primarily produced, the climate might change and it just might not grow anymore. Or, I think, food, we all have to eat. Food is a very easy way of bringing climate into a conversation. Ask about their hobbies. If they love going skiing every winter, that's maybe not something they'll be able to do for the rest of their lives. I remember reading an article about how there's only a handful of countries left that can can host the Winter Olympic Games because there's just not that many countries left where you can reliably expect snow every year. So again, just like find out what it is that they care about and see how you can bring climate into that. Because at the end of the day, climate is affecting all the parts of our lives. And finally, it's the story stage, so the storytelling element about making climate personal. So wherever you can, it's so good to keep it local and current and relatable to everyday life. So again, talk about people, their jobs, how they commute to their jobs, what they eat, where they go on holiday. Just keep it very clear. If you can, for example, earlier this year here at NCAS, we released an article about how climate change is changing rain patterns around the world. But one of our climate scientists, Ed Hawkins, who created the climate stripes, which you probably are aware of, he had created some visuals and graphs specifically on this one district in England and looking at how the rain patterns have changed there. And I'm not even from that part of England. I don't live in that part of England, but I found it so interesting to then really look into how that has changed that specific community, how, they have the agriculture, they have this river, and how that the rain changes have changed all these very specific things that are happening in this part of the world. So if there are, ways for you to look into your audience's local or like really relatable areas and topics and how climate is impacting those, that's a really good thing to do. It's good to visualize a future And, just visualizing climate in general, as we spoke about, the football pitch photo might be a good one. The climate stripes is an excellent visual tool that people can understand. Um, but it's really important to visualize a future because so much of this climate messaging is so doom and gloom, and it really feels like apocalyptic sometimes. And it is a very scary and important topic, but we do also need to have reasons to care and keep talking and keep doing things. And we're not going to if there isn't a future to look forward to. So yeah, just do some dreaming with people and help them imagine what kind of future they want to be in and how possible it is. Focus on those sustainable future alternatives, quieter cities where there's more trees and gardens on the rooftops and birds have returned and less cars in the streets. I feel like to most people that should feel like an appealing future. And yeah, that's related to give people something to dream about so they can actually hold on to this topic of climate change with something positive and something to actually care about. And yeah, so emphasize why we should all care. And just to finish, I have this lovely quote, which I think summarizes it all. We need to find narratives based on cooperation, mutual interests, and our common humanity. And this is just a QR code if you would like to find out more about the National Center for Atmospheric Science, in case you don't know already. But that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. So if anybody has any questions, now's the time to ask them. Either by putting them in the chat or raising your hand and unmuting yourself. Um, okay, we have a question from Irene. How would you recommend to apply this when studying niche topics?
What do you mean with niche? Like really specific?
I mean, but I can sort of relate to this because like when you're doing um like fundamental science, when it's not so
Mm,
much like the climate science, but like studying like smaller atmospheric chemistry
mm.
processes, which are maybe not so known to people.
I think that's actually already like a huge advantage because as I was saying, like the whole climate is such a broad thing. Like how do you even define it? How do you define climate change? You can look at it from so many different perspectives. As I was saying, you could see it purely as like as a agricultural issue or purely as an economic issue or as a human rights issue. There's just so many different elements you can look into it, and it's much easier to bring it down to as small of a subject as possible. So if you literally know about a very specific chemical atmospheric element that is contributing or impacting climate in whatever way, I think that is a very fascinating conversation starter and can really make the topic feel a bit more tangible because you can be like this, there's a very specific thing over here. um yeah, conflict constant is so far away. Yeah, I mean that's what I mean, like it is really difficult when that's I think one of the greatest climate communications challenges is just how distant it can feel. um so yeah, any of the tips that I had over there, just if you can use that on something that if you are looking into something that is going to happen far away in the future, if there is a way to compare it to what's happening today. Again, I don't know exactly if this is like a good example to use, but for example, we're currently some of our scientists are designing this really cool tool where they're going to compare what today's what historical weather events, so like some kind of really significant floods or heat waves or droughts, what they would look like in today's climate. And I think that's such a fascinating example of taking a topic that people are already aware of, something that has happened, something that some people have lived through, but then just kind of showing, if that had happened with today's temperatures and with today's elements in the air, then it would be this much more intense or more impactful. So yeah, I don't know. This is a really good advice on this topic, but yeah, wherever it's possible to bring it back to things that people can visualize and imagine as part of their own lives, as part of something current. That's what we have to do. There's another comment. Yeah, it is definitely really difficult to speak about these things without sparking any of those heavy emotions. I definitely agree. I've had plenty of difficult conversations myself, and I think that's why this whole idea of holding on to hope is so important, wherever possible. Just need to bring it, even if like the science that you are finding is all negative and there's only like things going down and getting worse, the one hope that you do always have is that you are working on this and that there are people who care. And I think that is, I did a public engagement event the other weekend where we spoke to lots and lots of children about the Arctic and Greenland ice sheet. And that was something that we kept coming back to of, if you are feeling worried, that, just remember, like we have like all of us over here, and you could be one of these people, like if you're talking to a child, for example, you could also work in this field and, you could contribute to trying to, find these solutions and study these topics to, basically make the world a better place in a way. And I think that is always, that's like, again, returning, if you can't find a good angle in the science that you're trying to communicate, just always return to you as a person, which again, I know is going to be quite contradictory to, as far as I understand, like scientists who are often like asked to remove your personal element from your communications. But yeah, you can always just go back to, but like I have so many people working on this and we are like finding new things every day. And with more information we have, the more information we communicate, more people learn about this, more people get inspired, more people get involved. And that's all that we really need. I have this quote that I always use when I talk about like my personal journey, where David Attenborough said how we have all the like science facts and we have people doing science. But what we now need is, as he says, climate change is now a communications challenge. And I just really agree with that, where, we just need to keep talking about it. More people need to know about this. More people need to be inspired and be aware and be informed. As simple as that. I hope that made sense. I feel like it was very chaotic. I've never done this online, so that was very new.
Well, we appreciate it. It's always good with some new topics and some new input.
Yeah, I hope it was useful and interesting.
Do you have any last minute questions or thoughts? Okay, if not, then I will say thank you again, Ilse. I will turn off the recording.